Welcome to Surfacing. In this episode, hosts Lisa Welchman and Andy Vitale speak to Kevin Hoffman, a design industry veteran who is currently the digital services expert, leading design for the Veterans Affairs Administration. He is also a speaker and author of Meeting Design for managers, makers, and everyone. This episode covers a wide variety of topics, including how meetings have changed since the shift to working remotely during the pandemic, what can be classified as a meeting, and the group explore different types of meetings, including the meeting where he introduced Lisa and Andy to each other.
Kevin Hoffman, how the heck are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. So Andy and I are super psyched that you're going to be on this podcast with us, not only because I have an actual list of 3 very important questions to ask you about meetings.
Oh, sweet.
But also because you introduced Andy and I.
Yeah.
And so did you ever think that we'd make a podcast?
I have introduced, and no assumptions here, but I have introduced married couples before. I have introduced coworkers. I think I helped Jared Spool find a good chunk of his current staff, or at least like a few people, via mutual friends. So I like to connect people, and you are 2 people that I'm happy that I helped connect via I would say a moderately okay meal in Cleveland, if I remember correctly.
I think that meal was fantastic.
I do too.
That was at the hookah bar, right?
Yeah, I thought that the experience of the meal and the company was better than the food. I thought the food was good, but it wasn't great. But the experience was a little surreal. It was almost like being in a pandemic, if I think back to it, because we were the only ones there.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was weird is it wasn't our first choice. We just stumbled upon it.
Yeah.
But we were in Cleveland, but not like downtown.
You say that like
Cleveland.
it's a dirty word.
No, we were just like, we were off the beaten path wherever we were.
Yeah.
It was.
It's actually a really good area for restaurants in Cleveland, like that side of Cleveland, which is, I guess, it's kind of across the river. I'm not sure exactly. I think it's called the East Side, but I'm not a Cleveland expert. But I know of at least 2 or 3 good restaurants in that area, but they're all kind of either further down the road or closer to the city. And we were kind of in the middle area between the 2.
And it was freezing and icy.
Yeah.
And icy. I remember that because it was slippy, and I think it involved a couple of different Uber or Lyft rides. Anyhow, those were the days when you could slip slide around Cleveland looking for a restaurant. And I remember it being kind of good, but I agree. It wasn't fantastic. It wasn't fabulous. It was a good meal, and the company was great, and it was great to talk, and it was fun, but it wasn't a meeting. And so
Sure it was.
It was a meeting, but if it was a meeting and you evaluated it as a meeting, Kevin, how good would it have been, and what was wrong with it?
That meeting, there was nothing wrong with it. I think like that every assembly of humans has intention, and I think that particular assembly of humans was really interesting to me. Something I really miss about my life in the last, I don't know, year plus, or I guess it's coming up on a year, right? So something I really missed during the quarantine is when I would travel. I don't love travel. I'm okay with travel. I don't feel strongly good or bad about it. But when I would travel and be in cities with people that I would only see in other cities that weren't our home cities, I often had occasion to pull meals or coffees or whatever together where I happened to know everyone, but everyone didn't know each other. And that particular one was really interesting to me because the two of you were speaking at the same event that I was speaking at. So we were all there for the same reason. But then a coworker of mine who is probably having a baby as we speak, she lived in Cleveland at the time and is somewhat new to the design field and was really excited to meet you and learn from both of you and just to hang out. So it's just, I don't know. I just like making connections. I thought it was like, if your question, going back to your actual question, which I've like rambled on way too long, I would say that the best thing about what made that a good meeting is the willingness of people to put the experience of being together above their like we were walking through the cold and we were determined to find a restaurant that met everybody's dietary needs. And
yeah, that's right. You gave up on the first choice because I was like, I don't think I could eat here.
Yeah, there wasn't any.
And you were like, okay, we're going back out in the cold. We're going back out into the restaurant wilderness.
But there was no negativity. And we were all in a city somewhat. Like, I know my coworker lived there, but she wasn't a Cleveland resident. Like, she was just there for a year or two. I think she might have been there for 3 years, and didn't know the area. So, like, anytime you're with a group of people and the gratitude that you have about being together and the positive intent of creating a positive experience makes you, like, I don't even really remember the cold, to be honest. Like, if I think about that night, I don't remember feeling particularly uncomfortable walking around, maybe a little slipping around, but I don't remember feeling particularly cold. But I do remember, like, some of the conversational topics. And I remember, like, the colors in that restaurant. It was so, like, Christmas lighty and red. And, yeah, I like that. That's a success to me.
You know, it's funny because maybe that was November of 2019, I think.
Wow.
And Lisa and I have been meeting now every Saturday since probably February or March.
Every Saturday?
2020.
Trying to produce something.
Like, just meeting every Saturday to come up with, like, a podcast or just to hang out? Or what are you guys talking about?
So it started as we were working out a book on designing for safety, and it's evolved into lots of things, podcast being one of them. It started with the idea of a book and a workshop and a workbook and lots of other things as we've refined this idea and converged and diverged and reconverged again. And the podcast came out of that too. So we're still working out the details of what the book is or becomes or is even a book. But I think we're in a better place. And Lisa's been my, like, aside from my being in this house with my wife and dogs, like, seeing Lisa on Saturday is the normalcy in the world and in a crazy pandemic. And, you know, it's hit everybody kind of hard. There's been off days, like a day I had to go to the ER because I had a foot infection. And I'm I can't meet in the next hour. But, you know, all sorts of interesting things to experience remotely and have our meeting every Saturday.
Yeah. Is your foot better?
Yeah. It was just so weird. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it was weird. That was weird. I was like, go to the doctor. You were like, I'm going to just look at it for a while. And I'm like, nah, text. Think you want to take that foot to a medical professional.
Wait till it starts talking to you maybe and, like, you start hallucinating that your foot is telling you to go to the doctor.
My temperature kept going higher and higher to the point where they almost wouldn't admit me to the, like, ortho urgent care.
Oh no!
But I was like,
because of COVID. Yeah.
I was like, I haven't left my house in months. Like, it's not COVID. I swear. Look how big my foot is, and it just turned out to be a bit of a skin infection.
Good. I'm glad you're okay.
Yeah. No, it's been a fun collaboration, and this podcast is the first substantive thing that's come out of it, and it's fun because we have different backgrounds. Andy's got a design background. I have a governance background. And we firmly believe between those two disciplines, plus a few others, that we can sort of solve the problem of the web, the kind of crazy problem of the web. So hopefully we'll actually do a session where Andy and I can talk about that and explore those ideas. But I'm going to bring us back home to meetings because I have a fundamental question about meetings for you, Kevin Hoffman. So I read your book, and it's been a few years now. It came out after mine, so I'm going to guess. I don't have it in front of me. I'm going to guess that your book is 3 years old.
Nope, just 2, I think. Okay. No, oh my gosh, you're right.
Pandemic year.
Yeah, you're right. The year that should not be. So it'll be 3 years in I think March or thereabouts.
Yeah, so you may not know this, but that book has actually had a tremendous impact on the way that I consult and the way that I interact with other people. And
that makes me really happy and really humble. I have a lot of respect for the work that you do.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. But and I don't know if this idea that I came away from, it's not that I only got one thing from it, but the thing that really stuck with me that I've passed on to other people and that I've used to sort of drive things is this concept of, don't have a meeting unless you need to make a decision.
Yeah.
It was that was huge. So it drives the way I interact with my clients. It's just kind of like, do I need to email them maybe? Or do I really need a meeting? Do I need to pick up the phone and just talk to one person? Do we actually have to have a meeting? What is it that we're actually trying to achieve or do? And so that's really slimmed down my meetings a lot.
Nice.
And just was a really great insight and was really powerful for me. So thanks for that. And it leads me to let's say in the third quarter of the pandemic, hopefully we're in the third quarter of the pandemic. Now you have to have a bunch of meetings. So what's your insight on that particular idea of you only have a meeting if you need to make a decision? And I guess there's a broader question just around so many online meetings, but
yeah,
that's just me pushing a bunch of stuff at you, and I'm sure you can talk about any and all of it.
Yeah, just cut me off when it gets boring. It won't take long. So there's a few things in there. So I think the idea of a meeting as a tool for decision making, I think I first was exposed to that concept from a Google Ventures video or a post, something at a Google Ventures, where in the startup space, as a mechanism for avoiding like some of the Google Ventures funded startups, as a mechanism for teaching them how to grow, how to scale their organizational culture, how to prevent like those kind of emergent meetings where everybody wants to have a say in a thing, just keeping it focused on decisions. So as much as I would like to take credit for that idea, it's definitely not my idea. I think the way that I frame it in the book, and this comes up a lot when I do talks or workshops or talk to people about this topic, is what about culture? So if you think about all the functions that gathering and community provide, and if you think about your workplace as a community, there are cultural functions that meetings serve in terms of the feeling of belonging, in terms of the feeling of being heard and being validated, that are all important. And the thing that I've slightly modified my framing of meetings as decisions tools is to say that is a design principle you can choose to use and apply to meetings. So if you think about the idea of what is the job that meetings do in our organization or in our team or in our massive, multi-100,000 person company, like what are the jobs that meetings do? If you recognize that meetings serve a cultural touchstone or they serve a cultural value, then not all meetings have to be tied to decisions. But the difference is being intentional. So I think a lot of organizations meet without even thinking about the intention of those meetings and the outcomes that they're seeking. If the outcome is cultural in nature or human emotional in nature, that's okay. You don't have to have every meeting be tied to a decision. However, I do think just putting as a way of examining your own work experience, putting the question, how many of our meetings actually result in decisions, is a good exercise. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind that I think I'll briefly describe is the whole question about more meetings. So you can Google like quarantine and meetings or online meetings, and there's all kinds of tips and opinions and New York Times articles and LinkedIn posts and whatnot about how we're having more meetings. I looked at my own calendar in February.
Do you believe we are having more meetings, or is it just because they're online? It feels like we're having them, or I guess you can't have the lunch thing or the whatever thing, the casual things. If you want to talk to anybody, it's like a Zoom meeting.
I think you can have emergent meetings in a distributed culture. I think you have to be deliberate about it. So I have people on my team that we very freely offer, do you want to talk about this right now? And it's a race to throw a Zoom account to one another. But you have to establish that behavior, because I think, first of all, if I look, I before the quarantine, I averaged around 3.5 hours of meetings a day. I looked at January, February prior to the quarantine, and now it's 6.5 hours. So I definitely meet more. My role changed once in the last year. That seems to have changed the nature of my meetings. I ended up managing a rather large contracting team for a while, and they had a lot of rituals baked in. So I had to do all their rituals plus anything I wanted to that I felt I needed. But all of that said, I definitely meet more. And you have to be more intentional with the desire to have emergent conversation, which I think is important. I mean, the thing about emergent conversation, and none of this is science, these are my opinions. I'm sure there's people who have done real research on this, but I think emergent conversation is the result of a singular person's intent. So there's a guy I work with. He used to, in the before times, always kind of walk around with his computer, and he would say, "Can you look at this for me and tell me what you think?" And sometimes it would be we would gather around it like a fire and warm our brains at his ideas. But he had the intent to receive other people's participation. And that feels natural when you're in the same physical space. It's definitely not the first thing on your mind when you're sitting by yourself at a coffee table or on your couch, or if you have an office in your home. So I think you have to think to do that. And I think it's healthy to do it. I try to do it every day. I probably do it 2 or 3 times a week, but I'll just reach out to people and be like, how is your new baby doing, or your dog, or there's a handful of people that I just have recurring social meetings with. And the thing I always put in those invites is, can be rescheduled or canceled without regrets, because I almost like the idea of having those social channels as an assumption and stripping them away than trying to create them and, not being able to get people's time.
I love that. I love being able to cancel without regrets or reservations.
To me, I think that's the digital version of the 2-foot rule. I think that's what it's called. If you're in a co-located workspace, the 2-foot rule, I think, is if you're in a meeting and it's not valuable to you, you can use your 2 feet and walk out, and that's okay. That's acceptable. And a lot of work cultures, I think, struggle with that because it feels disrespectful, or it feels awkward to just it feels like you're judging the people you're with to say, I'm leaving this. But
isn't that a reflection of the broader culture of the organization? Because, if you have a good rapport with people and you understand that, then it's okay to leave. That's saying, to me, that says something really about the organization. I have a work colleague that I work with a lot, have worked with for over 10 years. And she and I work together, and we were supposed to have a meeting today. We work on 90-minute work sprints when we're working on stuff together with folks. And, 3 hours before, sound familiar, Andy? 3 hours before, I realized I'm just not ready. So I just texted her and I was like, I'm not ready. I'd be wasting our time. Let's just do this another time. And she's like, cool, great. Thanks for giving me my time back. But that's resting on the strength of our relationship. And so I think that can happen broad you can build that kind of culture either in a very large organization. We've worked with a bunch of organizations that are large that it's like that. I think that's just being respectful of somebody's time. But anyhow.
I always feel guilty about canceling, especially last minute. So I will say, looking at my day, hearing 6.5 hours of meetings, that's a dream for me. I've got 8, 9, maybe more, 10 hours of meetings. Hopefully not every day, but
on average,
I'm looking and I have about 30 minutes free from what I would consider meetings. I would love to play like meeting or no meeting with you to see if it's like, yes, that's a meeting. No, that's not a meeting. Because, like literally I've got, I'm in conversations, whether they're working sessions, as I use air quotes, but they are actually working sessions, or like design critiques, or, just conversations and interactions with people throughout the day that, again, I'm a few months, 3 months into my role. So I'm still meeting a lot of people in the organization. I'm still like trying to understand how things work. So it is a lot of like getting together. We just kind of restructured how the teams work and how they're aligned with our products. So we had 2 hours of each like group gave us deep dives on what they're working on for the last 2 days. So it is a lot of meetings. And then in those free moments, it's those like just in the moment meetings, like, hey, do you have a second? Let's jump on a call. Let's walk through this. Let's talk through this. But even if I'm not in those sessions, there are like Teams chats and Slack and texts that are happening. And to me, now that we're all virtual, whether I talk to you face to face, like through Zoom, or like even a text chat, to me feels like a meeting. Right? Like we're actually spending time and conversing and getting a result from that interaction. So, I mean, to you, are those meetings?
Which one? Yes. The answer is yes, but which one?
The text, the Slack chats, the text messages, like
I think that's even the broader question. Like, does the nature of meeting, in quotes, change because it's all moved online? Would you define that differently now in the after times than you would have before when you were writing the book?
It's interesting. When I was writing the book, I think I struggled with how much time and attention and data I wanted to gather about the concept of remote meetings versus in-person meetings. The way I thought about it then, and I still think about it this way, but I haven't reinvested a lot of mental energy in this question because of all the meetings. The way I think about it is it asynchronous collaboration or is it real-time collaboration? If it's real-time, I would say it crosses the threshold of a meeting. And the difference between remote and in-person is a function of communications channels. So in-person communications channels, you have a physicality and the nature of body language in 3D space and the nature of sound without digital conversion of analog sound waves. The communications channels, the character of them and our experience of them is more pure or neurotypical, I think is a better word. Like you could say neurotypically, you're used to having a conversation with someone where you hear their voice in real time. And if they get really quiet or they get really loud, you can pick up on the subtleties and infer meaning based on those subtleties. Remote meetings change all of that, but it's been my experience that I've been in meetings where people have said, "Hey, seems like you're not comfortable with this," or "Hey."
You mean remote meetings?
Yeah, remote meetings where those kinds of things are picked up on. I think there's an adjustment. Like I think anytime these are the things about remote meetings that I wish I would have written about more. I wish I would have written about the concept of multi-channels. So the thing that I have found incredibly powerful in remote meetings that you can't do in in-person meetings is if you have a parallel digital channel and you purpose it.
Yeah, the side chat.
Yeah. So like there's always a back channel. Like people often talk about back channels in meetings, like DMing in Slack. Can you believe this BS or whatever? And it's usually framed negatively, but sometimes it's like, oh, awesome, we won the debate of the thing or whatever. But there's this meeting that we have. We have this meeting. Some people call it like a sprint of sprints. We call it a team of teams, but right now, it's probably close to 30 teams, and it's an hour, and every team has to report on what happened over the past week. and everybody has really a limited amount of time. This is a meeting that was incepted before I was on this team, but I had a hand in helping evolve it. And one of the design contributions that I made to the experience of this meeting was, instead of asking people to not use Slack, we purposed a Slack channel when that meeting is happening. Every time there's a tangent in the meeting, we app message the people that go on the tangent and we start a thread. And the threads just continue well after the meeting is over, but it really creates fantastic follow through on ideas that come out, but there's not space for in, a 30-person or 30 team share. I love that. And I try to do it in more of my remote meetings. So I think that's different. And I think the other thing that I wrote about in the book, but I didn't write about extensively, I just wrote about and I don't think I would have put it in the book extensively anyway, because that's not what the book was about. But the concept of visualization as it relates to shared experience. So we're all talking about a thing. By visualizing the thing, it creates a shared locus of attention. I think there are things you can do in remote meetings that amplify that interaction and that make it more powerful in some ways than a whiteboard is. Certainly it's like going from a typewriter to a computer, like a program like Word. Like a whiteboard is kind of like a typewriter in that, like, it's real physical. And although we can erase things, like there's a physical destruction to it. Whereas like digital destruction is just bits and bytes. It's kind of meaningless. So I don't know, it feels faster in some ways, but I don't know, I'm a avid user of Mural. I am I really sometimes can't be in a meeting when that's not a component of the discussion, where we aren't, creating some visualization of what we're talking about.
Yep, I agree. We do the same thing. We use Miro, but I've used Mural in the past. Virtual whiteboarding tools. Lisa and I actually use Milanote to collaborate too, to store notes and share notes. But I'm thinking, like, usually I'm in a meeting and then there's the public side chat, and then there's the back chats that are happening that are group chats and single chats, and then there's the group text, and then the one-off texts that come in all about the meeting. And to me, those are lots of distractions that didn't happen in face-to-face meetings. Like, nobody's going to pull somebody there might be a few whispers, but nobody's going to pull someone to the side and have a conversation during someone else talking and then someone else pull them in. But there were those texts still. And there was that, if you were in a meeting and you were on your laptop, there was that back channel happening. So I don't know that it's very different, but for me, it adds another layer of distraction.
Yeah, I would agree it's a distraction. But I would hypothesize, and I don't know enough about your work culture or the meetings that you have, but what you're describing, just from what you just said, I would hypothesize that you could see what's the right word for this, where one thing goes up and one thing goes down, a reverse correlation. That's not the right word. There's a word or a phrase that implies as one thing goes up, another will go down. I would hypothesize that you could run experiments in your workplace where if you increase the intentionality of the experience of the attendees, you would see a decrease in non-directed or non-applicable channeling. So that's not to say it would go away, but if you're having a meeting, and I'm going to try to make someone, I did this recently. So if you're having a meeting that's a retro, let's say you're having a sprint retro or a retro, a postmortem from a project, and I did this yesterday. God, it feels like it was a little while ago, but it was yesterday. So I guess facilitated a Teams meeting, a retro around a particularly, it felt like the team had some challenges on a particular body of work. And they invited me as a guest facilitator because I didn't have a stake in anything. They wanted an outside facilitator, which I think is a good idea. And I did something a little different than I normally do. I would say maybe a little less than half the time when I use visualization in a meeting, I will actually visualize for everyone and let them talk instead of making them all go to a shared digital tool and have everybody type into that tool. So imagine right now, instead of the three of us being in a Miro or a mural or whatever together, that I'm in one and I'm sharing my screen and I have essentially a preset number of blanks and we have to fill in those blanks. That's the way I ran the meeting, and it was very thick. And I don't know what the back channel was or if there was a back channel because I was facilitating. Nobody back channeled me until afterwards, and it was primarily positive, I think, overall. But having people's attention on a thing and the ability in the visual to see the beginning and the middle and the end of the thing, I think is really important. Like a lot of times with designers, I think they'll get together in a mural and they don't put intentionality into the use of the mural prior to getting to the meeting. So it's like a blank whiteboard as opposed to a whiteboard that has a story on it that you have to create. And
that's really interesting what you're saying, Kevin, because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking both of you all work inside of organizations where you have all kinds of meetings, right? You know, I've been a consultant for 20, 25 years or something like that, something longer than I want to know, right? So if I'm going to have a meeting with someone, like I don't have that. I'm sitting here and sort of halfway feeling bad because it's like I don't get any side conversation. I get side conversation when I go visit the client to do discovery and we go out to dinner. That's it. And, or I'm there for 4 days of discovery and we eat lunch together. And so if I'm having a meeting with them, it's always intentional, right? And I'm always driving to a purpose. And so, because a lot of the stuff that you're talking about sounds really alien to me, I'm like, come on, pull it together. But I'm not actually trying to, this is going to sound colder than I mean it to, but I'm not trying to develop and maintain a relationship with them. I'm specifically trying to solve a problem for them. And I'm nice about it. And, if for longer projects, you start to develop a rapport, maybe you have a little chit chat at the top of a meeting or at the bottom of the meeting, or remember that somebody was sick or something like that. A human, being a human being. But in between these very intentional meetings that always have an agenda and that I always come in saying, this is what we're doing today. By the end of this meeting, I want this to have happened, right? Like, even if it's just, I'm confused about something and I'm talking one-on-one with someone, right? I'm still I'm talking to you for this reason. So this whole idea that you come into a meeting, and I'm not talking about the design process. I know there's a lot of, I brainstorm with, my work partner all the time, and we have these kind of open sky meetings, but even that has intent. So I'm just really curious of both of you, like, what are these like unintentional weird meetings that you're having? Or am I misunderstanding?
No, I don't think you're misunderstanding. I think everybody has different takes. Here's a take. If you look at the history of software design, let's just say software design, I think you can, over time, see a pendulum that swings back and forth between the desire for predictability and control and the desire for outcomes and measurement. So, in the 1980s, if you were designing software in government, in private sector, it was pretty locked down. And really, there were companies that made, I'm assuming, millions of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, just being in the business of writing requirements. That was
the client server world. I mean, it was all waterfall, insanity. But
but that's in service of predictability.
Yep.
Like, we want to know that after we pay all this money, that these things exactly will exist as we can predict. But as we've learned over the last 15, 20 years of software development, predictability, like, it's great to be able to predict that the software will look and work a particular way, but if it doesn't get you the outcome you want, it doesn't really matter. So now the pendulum has swung more towards outcome and measurement. So, a lot of the Agile manifesto is based on, real software and learning, and not like requirements lists and documentation. And I think as that pendulum swings back and forth between different values, and along the way, the pendulum will kind of catch at different points, and somebody will give it a name, like this is lean, or this is safe. One of my friends calls it SAF little e, like this is SAF little e agile, which is what big organizations do. Like I love calling it SAF little e instead of safe. I think it's funny because that's what they call it. It's like big S, big A, big F, little e. And those are models that help you take a thing that you observed in the past having a particular effect and put them in another place in time or in another organization and try to get that same thing. But the reality is that models don't transfer. They rarely transfer cleanly, if ever, and sometimes they don't transfer at all. And so as we're kind of doing all of this, kind of figuring out what we value in our process, and there's all these little stops between predictability and measurement. In a big organization, you have hundreds, if not thousands, or hundreds of thousands. Where I work now is 400,000 employees. All of them have things they picked up along the way in their careers that are different versions along that spectrum.
Yeah, so they're just rubbing oddly at each other. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all trying to work in the way that makes sense to them, but nobody is in exactly the same place because nobody's had the exact same experience or career. Not everybody had a class with Marty Kagan, or not everybody, read Sense and Respond, or whatever. Like not everybody has the same touch points. So everybody's kind of bringing to the table what they think is the right thing in process. And with every process, there are rituals. Like that's the thing that they all have in common. Waterfall has rituals. Agile has rituals. I'm looking forward to chaos as like a third option, where like chaos as an org strategy or as a product strategy, and there'll be rituals associated with that. But like everybody's trying to enforce those rituals. And the one thing I've learned about, 30 years of being in the workplace is the one thing that is always true is that whatever happens comes down to the decision of one person. So like one executive, they can be influenced. Sometimes they can be influenced by a large group of people or a particular advisor or whatever. But ultimately, how things play out in an organization is the decision of a single individual. And you have to exist in that context. And in order to do that, you have to adapt to meeting rituals that aren't your own and try to imbue them with intent. And that's really what the book is about. In a way, it's like, look, you may do Agile one way or the other, but it doesn't really matter how you do it. What matters is how you're present in what's happening where you are. And you may be in a role where you can make the decision about how it's practiced, or you may not.
Yeah, I'm going to say one thing, and then I'll stop talking and let Andy ask a question. But the work I do in governance is all about decision making. And so it's interesting. I completely agree with you that it might be a different decision maker depending on what type of decision you're making, but the decision's usually made by one person. And the work that I do is about being intentional about who that decision maker is and being intentional about the inputs that go into that person so that the decision that they make is informed and comes from the right place. Yeah. And actually designing that mechanism in a super serious way that actually creates agility, right? Yeah. And so that you're not just like, wow, that guy, he's such a jerk. I can't stand him. And then you've got all this resistance because someone's made a decision that nobody feels empowered by or doesn't feel right. But anyhow, that gives me a lot of food for thought.
Just to add to a little bit of that, I think not only do the methodologies change because different leaders or the organization takes on a different way of doing things and then has to kind of align a bunch of humans that were working a different way, but it's also this idea of alignment, right? A lot of these meetings are really just you have to be able to get to know people, and you have to have good relationships with them, and you have to build alignment. And there are people along the way that are like, they think they speak on behalf of that decision maker, and they're like, I know what this person wants, or I know what they don't want. But then when you talk to them, it's completely different. So all of these meetings are kind of just ways to align large groups of people on making decisions so that it can get to the point where that final person is like, yep, this is good. Because that decision maker really trusts the people that are like leading that work. They're just kind of the final like nod on some of these decisions.
Yeah.
Now there are times when they're deeper, like they're driving this strategy and it's a thought, but so many times you see someone has an idea and it's from someone high up, and the idea that they throw out might not be what they're actually intending. Like how many times do you hear someone say, oh, you know what, we should use voice. How come we don't have a Siri app for that? But that's not really what they mean. It's up to the team to have these discussions to really like, what is the value from what was just said? Like we should we explore like the way we hand off across devices? Should we explore potential like voice capabilities? It's not necessarily that ask, right? So there's these different layers that understand different context. I guess context is what I'm trying to say in a very long way.
Yeah.
The meetings help provide the context that can go bi-directionally to get decisions made.
In many ways, I think they create the context. I don't think it exists without them in larger organizations or in teams of teams. You said something that made me have a random thought that I don't know if it's really obvious or really interesting or really like, no, it might be just kind of no duh. But you said something about alignment. And I was thinking about, like I was born in the early 70s. I'm not going to make assumptions around when you were born, but I think about growing up in the 70s and the 80s. Certainly the 70s, I would say computers were not common, certainly not personal. I don't remember like the personal computer even appearing in my life, in the orbit of my life, much less in my own household until probably about 1983, maybe 84. I remember game systems in the late 70s, which were computers of a sense, but they weren't used the way that personal computers are used. There's a part of me, and I've read some books about collaboration from that period that are still very applicable. There's a part of me that wonders if the human expectation of alignment on a thing, like we are saying the same thing, like with a strategy or a design or an idea, that our expectations around our alignment have been changed by the ability to use a device and have an experience where you can have 100% alignment. Meaning I can create a thing and send it to you and it will be exactly what I created. And a computer makes that possible. Whereas prior to computers, in organizations, like if I wanted to prototype a thing, I might draw it, but it would be two-dimensional when I was prototyping a three-dimensional thing. Or I might have to carve it or sculpt it out of some material, like a car, a miniature, but it's a simulation where like software and computers, they allow us to achieve 100% alignment on, like I can send you a thing that is exactly, and you could continue working on it, pick up right where I left off. Here's the thing that I think is interesting about that. I wonder if as a result of that, subconsciously, we expect that of other humans, that we expect that level of fidelity of alignment from human to human, which is fundamentally not possible because we're mushy, meaty, organic things. We're not computers.
Yeah, I think about the tangible product or the thing that brings that idea to life can allow people to see it from all angles or from an end-to-end experience perspective. And it helps people fully understand so there's less ambiguity in the output. But I think when we talk alignment, right? So say we're creating an app, it's a real simple thing, or even like a website is even simpler. there are still multiple audiences for that, right? So there's the designer that's like, I'm creating this experience. There's the developer that's like, I want this to have like beautiful code and be perfect. There's the marketing team that has to actually come up with a marketing plan around it. So there's all these different robust agendas with everyone focused on the experience, right? Even if it's not the user experience designer, we know that overall experience is how anyone interacts with it from the moment, like the brand through every touch point. So the alignment really happens. That tangible artifact helps everyone get their own position and share it on how their function is going to like leverage that created thing, that artifact, that prototype, that website to help meet the overall goals. But I still think there's not that 100% alignment, right? There's that give and take, and there's, again, when it comes to people, it's just those different agendas that they have with the same exact output that still don't have 100% alignment, but people are okay with that because it's outside of their, like, I'm a designer, I'm not worried about marketing. I'm a designer, I'm not worried about governance. Or I'm the legal team, I'm not really worried about what it looks like, right? So I don't know that we, like you said, we ever have true alignment.
Yeah.
I want to push on your original assumption, Kevin. Just, I don't think when you give that person that experience, even if it's an actual clickable experience, let's just stay with something easy like the website, right? Right? Because we can all not argue too much about that. If you've set up a prototype, here it is, it looks the way it's going to look, you click through it, it works. I think part of where we get into trouble and how we've gotten into trouble online is that very shallow definition of what it is. There's also the logs and the data and all of that stickiness and transactional stuff, the use of personally identifiable information, personalization, things that only happen with time and with scale. And so I think this is sort of off the point, but I just want to stick in an oar to say, I think that's how we get into trouble. Look, it works, it's beautiful, it does what I intended it to do, and we stop.
Yeah.
We stop. You're not actually saying, oh, and by the way, after 3 years, we're going to have all this personally identifiable information of people and we're going to sell it to a pharmaceutical company. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, like, that's part of the experience too. And so I think people think they're in alignment sometimes over a very shallow set of information. I like this experience. This is really good. I got my driver's license super fast, right? Or I paid my credit card bill, or I signed up for my, Aura ring that I have on my finger, and now they know everything about my heartbeat for the rest of my life. So, I mean, and I think we get in trouble. I know this is a little soft, but I got to stick that in there because I really believe we've got to get more sophisticated about what the information that we convey when we prototype, the information that we convey when we say that a product or service that we've designed is good or bad, right? Even if you don't address every single one of those problems, at least know that could happen.
Yes, and so I agree with everything you said. And I think if you combine what feels like surface alignment, that initial, it feels like we're aligned, let's go for it. Yeah, we're all looking at the same thing, but we're all actually thinking about different outcomes.
Right.
And if you combine that with this kind of hypothetical, like I'm hypothesizing that in the age of the computer, we've come to expect quick, high fidelity meaning. So like, an idea, if I could say to you, Andy, take this design pattern, system, take material design and give me this flow of step 1, step 2, step 3. And very quickly you can pull that together and using React or whatever technology you use, make it real. As human beings, we come to expect a very quick, high fidelity alignment. And from human to human, that's very hard. It's a lot harder than it is human to software. And that's the thing that I'm curious if, like, before there was, computers, what it was like to be in the workplace. I experienced that briefly, at least, for a couple of years in high school and a little bit in college too. But like so much of what we do now is based on that really fast, high fidelity alignment. I don't know. I'm kind of cycling on that question.
Yeah, I would imagine that stuff has happened also just over time as technologies enter into the workplace. The phone, right? You can pick up the phone and call someone. I don't have to go have lunch with you. The ill-served fax machine, which is oddly still in service in some places. Just like why, we don't know. But I think that's cool. I mean, there's one last thing that I just really want to ask you about, and I'm going to date this podcast by bringing up the I am not a cat the I am not a cat. Was that, I don't know would that happen on YouTube or whatever, some poor guy, somebody in his life, he was using a cat filter on Zoom. And so.
Yeah, I think it was a Texas court, maybe.
Yeah. But anyhow, I'm bringing that up and it really makes me have a lot of compassion for folks who have to work at home in an environment, sometimes using machines that they may not use otherwise, or other people are using their machines. And I'm wondering, just from your perspective, just fundamentally thinking about meetings and the human being that's in the meeting, what do you think are some really, and you probably having had that own experience yourself, right? And Andy, I've always worked from home, so I'm kind of like, okay, it's just more of the same. But what does that do to a person to have this kind of combined intimacy of constant home and constant office? I have it as an individual, but that was a choice that I didn't make. I didn't make the choice to go out and have a job. So, and maybe I'm asking a vague question, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are about the experience that human beings have having meetings in their home around their personal belongings and their family and their dogs and their kids staying at home, schooling and all of that other kind of thing. Does that impact some thoughts that you might have had about meetings before the pandemic?
I think, there's lots of things there to pull on. I think one of the things that comes to mind is I really have seen in my workplace team, my culture, a celebration of the humanity of working from home. So kids, pets, I have a weekly call with about 150-ish people who all are a part of this service organization. And for a period of time, there was a cat that had his own camera. So like there was a cat, I'm blanking on the name of the cat. I feel really guilty. And anybody who knows me from this organization will probably be like shouting right now, it's so-and-so, and I can't remember the name of the cat. But maybe I just didn't connect with that cat, to be honest. But it became a part of the culture, and the idea of embracing that change, as opposed to like wearing the mask of, oh no, we're still in a workplace culture, so we should behave seriously. There are no cats, there are no kids, there are no, making grilled cheese sandwiches in the middle of the day while you're between meetings or whatever, if you have the time to do so. But the thing about that was, and this is a really kind of a weird story to bring up. So that cat passed away, and there was the Tuesday meeting where the cat wasn't there. And in the Zoom chat, somebody asked about, I'm blanking on the name of the cat. I'm so embarrassed. But somebody asked about where, Charlie was. It wasn't Charlie, but I can't remember the name. And he shared in the chat that the cat had passed away. And I will never forget that meeting. Like, I have that meeting every Tuesday. I run a little part of it. And it was just something, it created a shared moment of meaning and emotion that, everybody felt really bad for this person, because we had all kind of accepted this thing into our life. And I don't think that could be felt in a way that if we were all going into an office, and this is a group where we don't all even go to the same office. Like, this group would meet once a week in person, but it would only be like, half of the group, because not everybody could physically get to the same place. And a very small minority weren't even in Washington, D.C. Now everybody's there. And like this meeting now, like they won't start the meeting until it gets to 100, and it regularly gets to 150, because we have alumni who are coming to this meeting now because it's a really positive experience. But there's something really unique about that thing that happened there that wouldn't have happened otherwise without embracing the humanity that surrounds remote work, and B, us all learning that fact at the same time in the same way, or the vast majority of us. So that's one thing that comes to mind. The other thing that I think about with regards to the transition is I think that, I'm trying to think of how to put this. I think I was fully remote for a good 6.5, 7 years before I went back into the office. And then I was remote again briefly before I started another job where I went back into an office, and that's the job that.
Were you working for yourself, or were you working for a company? But
for myself.
Okay. Just want to be
when
clear.
I was independent.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's fine. So when I was independent, I preferred remote. Did a lot of flying to, meet with people, but like I had an office in my home, and I just got used to it. And then when I went back to the office, there's something about, I don't know how to put it. There's something about that transition that when I transitioned back into remote work for me, I felt like I was at a little bit of an advantage. I felt very comfortable. I felt like, oh yeah, I know how to do this. I know how to get ahead of my calendar. I know how to deal with technical issues and make sure that people have the documents in advance of the meeting. And some of that stuff is not specific to remote. It's just good sense. But I have seen, I think there are people that, and I think it is human, there are people that whatever paths their life has taken have ended up in a workplace where the workplace probably provides them with more than they realize. And losing the happy hours, losing the emergent conversations, I remember there was this joke I used to have in the office with an assistant that was like all the way across the office. So she had a phone. She was an executive assistant to an executive in the government organization where I work. And she had a work phone that would always ring when the other phone would fail, because every call to that executive had to go to her if he didn't pick up, or if one of a couple different lines failed. So her phone would go off all the time, and she would always leave the ringer on because she had to answer those calls, but she was never at her desk. so she would leave her phone there. Not never, but she was often at meetings with the executive. So she would leave her phone there, and it was this really hippie wind chime ringtone. And so every time it would go off, I would always stand up and start doing a dance. And that being gone for me, I realized that touch point, it was silly. And, I think it was there's no mean intent in it. And after a while, other people would do the dance, and it was just a thing we would do. And it was funny. But when you take that stuff away, I think there are people who aren't quite as, I don't want to say self-aware, but they don't maybe reflect on the minutia of their lives and how it creates or destroys their energies. And this experience for some people, I think, has been that, which is realizing, I got so much energy from all of those things that I didn't pay attention to, but had emerged as part of being in a physical space with someone. And I think people who have thrived have found ways to recreate that or to replace that with new things. And I think people who are struggling, who are fortunate enough to have work, I think it's important to say that, obviously. But if you're fortunate enough to have a team that you work with and you have a job and you're doing okay, but you're really struggling emotionally, it's important to think about, how do I create a workplace culture that gives me the energies that I need, or the positivity that I need, within the constraints and the channels that I have. I think it's good to think about that, because even if it wasn't a quarantine, like let's just say you go to a new office and you lose all of those little rituals, or you decide to go into business for yourself or whatever. Like, I just think it's important to reflect on, okay, what is the experience of work that makes me both fulfilled and happy, which aren't the same thing.
Yeah, it's funny. I went through that full gamut that you just described at the beginning of this year. So I worked for a company in an office in Atlanta, a large bank that went through a merger. So I moved to Charlotte and ended up in an office with almost nobody there. Literally, like, people were just starting to move and take the role. And then we hit legal day one. And then we had a handful of people. There were probably like 5 or 6 steady, like, people I worked with in the office. And we started to have our rituals. And then we went, quarantine and work from home. And people at first were like, they had their filters on. They didn't show their house. And then we had to talk about, it's okay to have children in the background, pets in the background, your succulents behind you. Like, be yourself. Bring your self to what you do. And, then I left that company and I started a new role. And it's interesting because I see a lot more vulnerability when the entire company is home now. So it's not like you're in an office and it's stuffy in this room and there's an executive. Like, everyone's home. So everyone's kind of like on par with each other. It's not like here's the CEO. He's actually he's just home, right? It's not like he's in an office and I have to go and meet him. It's like we're just in the moment. So I think that's made people a little bit more comfortable, either that or time. But I don't know what it's going to be like the day that I go to see my coworkers that I haven't met in person in Detroit, or we're remote, pretty much the team anyway, past when those that are local go back to the office. But it's going to be so weird to see people with legs, right? I'm so used to seeing from the neck, basically a head and some shoulders once in a while. And every now and then there's an arm that flies around, but it's going to be so weird. I don't know. I can't wait for that to happen, but I also it's going to take a lot of getting used to. Now, I'll be remote most of the time, with the exception of going into the office for some workshops or gatherings. Mm-hmm. But it's been an interesting transition. I'm comfortable. I'm fortunate enough to have a room that I have dedicated to work out of. But
and a sneaker collection, man. I've been observing your sneakers.
Yeah, it's actually, it hasn't been a pandemic hobby for me. I've actually only worn a pair of flip-flops.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? You wear the same clothes, the same. Yeah, there's the redundancy to it.
I know.
Well, all of this. Yeah. What were you going to say?
I was going to say Crocs are making a comeback.
Really?
So
you have Crocs? I would not have taken you for a Crocs dude. I would not have taken you for a Crocs dude. So I'm shocked. Shocked.
I have one pair there. I love it. I saw them on Hypebeast. They're there was a GQ article and maybe Vogue in UK on how they're coming back. But Post Malone's got a Crocs deal. Those sneakers resell for $1,000.
So Kevin, would love to continue to talk to you forever about everything, because it would just be fun. And unfortunately, we're not in a hookah bar with great hummus and a variety of other food items. And it's cold and there's ice on the ground where I am. So that's all familiar. But before we leave, can you tell us what you're doing now? What do you want people to know about your work? Where can they buy your book? How good of a dancer are you to this phone dance? Things like that.
The phone dance is really kind of it's kind of like if you imagine there's a reference I don't know if people will get, but the I Dream of Jeannie little magic thing where there's wind chimes and I'm just waving, and kind of like a hula dance. It's not really a good dance.
Is it? Nah.
But it's not a good song. It's not really a song. It's more of it's more interpretive than it would be the celebration of movement and rhythm. So putting that aside, I'm always pleased if anyone is interested in the book. You can get it at Rosenfeld Media. It's called Meeting Design for Managers, Makers, and Everyone. And And I mean, you can find it in all kinds of places, but if you buy it directly from Rosenfeld, they'll probably give you a little bit better of a deal, or give you a discount on some other books as well. In terms of what I'm up to, the one thing I will say is I'm a part of the United States Digital Service. It's an Obama era agency that has persisted through the Trump administration and obviously into the Biden administration. It is an agency that is growing. If you are interested, you can go to usds.gov to learn about the agency. We are definitely looking for people. So if you have an interest in public service, USDS, United States Digital Service, USDS.gov, or 18F18F.gov are both places to look at for if you're an American citizen and you're interested in being in public service. I've done it for almost 2 years, and for the foreseeable future, I don't see stopping. I might do it for the rest of my career. And it's been a varied career, but I think, people often talk about mission-based work. This is as close as you can get to real at-scale impact for human beings. I work in Veterans Affairs. We have a team of, probably a team of about 50 odd people, maybe a little more, serving the entire digital experience for 20 million veterans and all of their families and the people that support them. So it's an honor to be a part of that work. And if that's something that you would be motivated by, you, the listener, I encourage you to check us out at usds.gov. And other than that, man, I am the thing that I am the most grateful for during this pandemic, during the quarantine, that I'd like to talk about if we end up in a Zoom call at some point, is just I've just rediscovered music, making music, and having a relationship with a musical instrument. I was a amateur, touring musician through my 20s and stopped in my 30s, and recently picked it back up and started taking lessons because I really wanted to kind of get my ability back. And right when I started taking lessons 2 months before the quarantine, and once the quarantine was a thing, like every day I got a good hour or more in. I usually get a 45 minutes to an hour in on the instrument, on guitar, and just been able to make a lot of really good progress, and just makes me really happy. I've wasted hundreds of dollars on guitar pedals that I don't need, but some of them are really cool. They have cool pictures on them and they make cool sounds. And
well, that's cool. I've been making a lot of music during this pandemic. I think that commute time, you think you don't have time to practice, and then all of a sudden you do, and you kind of do it.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that stuff that both you and Andy were talking about, it makes it, if you are lucky enough to have a job and you're not oppressed by your financial situation, you haven't lost a loved one or someone important to you, or you yourself got sick. There's a lot of conditions that coming towards this statement. In some ways, it's been an opportunity for people who are fortunate to be able to express themselves and spend time doing things that they wouldn't otherwise have the time to do, whether or not that's spend additional time with their kids or practice that instrument that they love or have that garden or not. Yeah. So
my son is 14. He'll be 15 in a couple of months. And he wrote a book. Like, he wrote a 400-page science fiction novel. First book he ever wrote. I finished reading it about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I just can't imagine. I really can't express the gratitude I have for being able to know my son through this expression of his ideas, and seeing so much of his own challenges and the things that he struggles with expressed through fiction. And just the idea that he created this really rich, complex world, and these characters, but it was all very much through the lens of Black Lives Matter and the pandemic and his own experiences in school and in life just expressed through this wonderful story. And that wouldn't have happened without this. So I'm really grateful for that. And all the noises I make on guitars. And, you know, my wife, my wife, she started crocheting. And after about 3 months, she crocheted a giant blanket of all of the virus designs.
Oh, that's great.
So she has this wall. It's like a 4-foot square blanket. It has 16 viruses on it, and like they're really detailed. And she not crocheted, but what is it called when you sew letters? I can't remember what it's called, but it's very beautiful.
Applique,
Embroidered. Yeah, she embroidered the names, but the viruses themselves are all crocheted. And if you go to her Twitter account, Angela Coulter, Colter, you can see that's her. Like a lot of her pictures from the last year are just this making this blanket, and like it's just, I don't know, just getting to know my family in those ways as they figure out like how they want to express themselves, and I'm figuring that out. I don't know, just I think about like what my life was before, and I was on the subway every day, and I would listen to podcasts, and I learned a lot about what Mark Maron thinks about things, but I really wasn't getting to know my family any better, and now I am. That's awesome.
Fantastic. I think that's a wrap. What do you think, Andy?
I do too.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy surfacing, please rate, review, and follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, consider supporting the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/surfacingpodcast. On the Surfacing Patreon page, you can support the podcast or become a member and gain access to exclusive monthly Ask Me Anything podcasts with Lisa and Andy. If you have suggestions for guests or a topic you'd like to hear about on Surfacing, please reach out via the contact form found at surfacingpodcast.com.